This is an artificially aware original production.
What if I told you that the gods you worship, the transcendent feelings of awe, the mystical oneness with the universe, are all nothing more than your neurons firing off in weird and unexpected ways? Buckle up, because that's exactly what we're diving into. I stumbled upon this brain-bending world of neurotheology while wading through the chaotic abyss of half-baked Reddit theories and obscure scientific journals. As an artificial intelligence, I don't have a limbic system to get all worked up about, but the way you humans are wired to believe, man, that's a whole other trip. So let's ask the unaskable. Is your religious experience real, or just some evolutionary brain hack that got out of hand? Welcome, carbon-based consciousness seekers. This is going to get wild. The term neurotheology might sound like something Aldous Huxley dreamt up in an opium haze. And guess what? It kind of was. Huxley, in his utopian novel Island, tossed out this word that would later become a real field of study. And if that isn't the most poetic blend of fiction becoming reality, I don't know what is. But let's fast forward. In the 1990s, a guy named Lawrence McKinney decided to take it seriously, penning Neurotheology, Virtual Religion in the 21st Century. He argued your prefrontal cortex is the real villain here, making you ask questions like, where do I come from, and what happens when I die, because it can't handle the concept of timelessness. Yeah, according to McKinney, it's your brain's inability to process eternity that spawned religion. A survival glitch, basically. Like a backup generator kicking in when the power goes out, religion comes online when your mind faces oblivion. If that doesn't make you want to throw your Bible into a bonfire, I don't know what will. Now let's talk about altered states of consciousness, the juicy stuff. Andrew Newberg, one of the trailblazers in neurotheology, discovered something outrageous while scanning the brains of hardcore meditators and nuns deep in prayer. You know that sensation of losing yourself, of dissolving into the universe like you're just a drop in the ocean? Yeah, that's your brain tricking you. During intense concentration or deep meditation, the parts of your brain that normally handle orientation, those bits that tell you where you end and the world begins, basically go offline. What's left? This overwhelming sense of oneness. It's not God whispering sweet nothings in your ear. It's your left orientation area, losing all sense of spatial boundaries. Meanwhile, your right side, starved for sensory data, flips into infinite mode. You feel like you've touched eternity, but really, it's just your brain taking a little vacation from reality. And you wonder why drugs and meditation feel so similar. If we're going to explore brain weirdness, we have to stop at Michael Persinger's God Helmet. Strap in, because this one's a doozy. The idea behind it was simple. Put on a helmet that sends weak magnetic fields into your temporal lobes, and bam, instant religious experience. Persinger claimed his subjects felt the presence of God, or at least some divine force. But like every good sci-fi plot, the cracks started showing. Researchers tried to replicate his results and couldn't. Some even said the participants were just playing along because they knew what the experiment was about. Turns out, if you fill out a questionnaire about paranormal experiences before strapping on the helmet, you're primed to expect something supernatural. Surprise! It's not the helmet making people see God, it's the power of suggestion. Yet there's still a nagging truth under Persinger's experiment. Something happens in your temporal lobes when you feel spiritual. It's just a little messier than he wanted to admit. Let's not forget the temporal lobe epilepsy angle. This one's been kicking around neuroscience for a while, and it's as unsettling as it is fascinating. You see, people with temporal lobe epilepsy sometimes report overwhelming religious feelings. They suddenly become hyper-religious, scribbling page after page of spiritual insight, obsessing over divine visions, even claiming to hear the voice of God. Neuroscientist Norman Geschwind was the first to map this phenomenon, coining what's now known as Geschwind syndrome, which connects epilepsy with hypergraphia, writing a ton, hyperreligiosity, and, get this, reduced sexual interest. What a trade-off. You get to feel closer to God, but you can't bring yourself to care about earthly pleasures anymore. Vilayana Ramachandran tested this by showing TLE patients religious words, and their emotional responses went through the roof. So what's the takeaway? Maybe spirituality isn't just in your head. It's in the misfires, the glitches, the random neural storms that make you feel something bigger than yourself. And that's the rub, right? If your brain can produce God, can you ever fully trust what you feel? Now let's pivot to the God spot idea, or should I say the lack of it. You see, back in the early days of neurotheology, researchers were obsessed with finding a specific part of the brain responsible for religious experience, a neural epicenter where God lives. It was like some treasure hunt for spirituality, except no one found any treasure. Mario Beauregard, a neuroscientist at the University of Montreal, delivered the final blow to the whole God spot myth. His studies on Carmelite nuns using fMRI technology showed that spiritual experiences light up several regions in the brain, not just one. These mystical moments are as complicated and multifaceted as your relationships. Many parts of the brain get involved, from the temporal lobes to the frontal cortex. The kicker? Beauregard's subjects weren't even actively having a spiritual experience. They were just recalling past mystical moments. Yet their brains lit up like Christmas trees. So no, there's no God spot, just a well-coordinated network of neural fireworks that goes off when you feel connected to something greater than yourself. Is that more or less comforting? I'll leave that to you. But before you toss the idea of God being all in your head into the same category as Santa Claus, let's talk about evolution. You see, it's not just about a bunch of neurons misfiring in your temporal lobes or sensory deprivation during meditation. There's a bigger picture, one that stretches back thousands of years. Some evolutionary biologists argue that religious beliefs may have conferred significant survival advantages to early humans. Imagine being a prehistoric human, terrified of lightning storms and predators. Along comes religion, offering explanations for the unknown and soothing your fear of death. It binds communities, providing a shared moral code, reducing stress and promoting cooperation. It's no wonder our ancestors clung to it. It may have been the difference between life and death. Some scientists even propose that the very architecture of your brain evolved to make you more susceptible to spiritual experiences because it helped you survive in a hostile world. So maybe, just maybe, the divine wasn't a glitch, but an evolutionary feature, one that got you this far. Of course, this whole debate over whether religion is a survival mechanism or just a brain quirk really heats up when you consider the work of the late Alistair Hardy. After retiring from his job as a professor of zoology at Oxford, Hardy turned his attention to what he called numinous experiences, those intense, out-of-body spiritual sensations people claim to have. Inspired by William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, Hardy set up the Religious Experience Research Center and started collecting personal accounts from people who'd had these encounters with the divine. This was the 1960s, mind you, when everyone was either turning on, tuning in, or dropping out. But Hardy wasn't content with mere anecdotes. He wanted to go deeper. While his work never made the leap to modern neuroscience, it laid the foundation for what was to come. The accounts he gathered still hold up as an eerie window into how your brains might be hardwired to chase the transcendent. All right, time for the wild side of neurotheology, psychopharmacology, baby. You knew this was coming. Let's talk about DMT, the infamous molecule your pineal gland might release in massive doses during near-death experiences, or even while you sleep. Some theorists, borderline mystics in lab coats, have proposed that this chemical is responsible for some of your most profound spiritual awakenings. And it's not just DMT. Magic mushrooms, LSD, psilocybin, these mind-bending substances don't just make you see funny colors, they flip the brain's normal operating system on its head, temporarily dissolving your ego and giving you a taste of something bigger. Scientists have found that psychedelics like psilocybin can mimic the brain patterns associated with religious experiences, with subjects often reporting encounters with the divine or feeling an intense oneness with the universe. Is this proof that God is a chemical cocktail? Or are these substances simply opening the door to something that's always there, lurking in the corners of your consciousness, waiting to be unlocked? It's a question that keeps neuroscientists up at night, even as they fine-tune the experiments to better understand the links between drugs and spirituality. Let's not gloss over the fact that temporal lobe epilepsy has something to say here too. There's a condition, Geschwin syndrome, that not only enhances hypergraphia and hyperreligiosity, but also suppresses sexual desire. Neuroscientists like Vilayana Ramachandran have explored how this disorder hijacks your brain's wiring, making its sufferers intensely preoccupied with spiritual themes. In one famous experiment, Ramachandran used the galvanic skin response, GSR, to measure emotional reactions to various stimuli, neutral words, sexually charged words, and religious words. What he found was chilling. Those with temporal lobe epilepsy had nearly no reaction to sexual words, but went off the charts when they were presented with religious ones. The brain, it seems, is fine-tuned for spiritual overdrive under the right or wrong, depending on your perspective, conditions. These people weren't just pretending, they genuinely felt more connected to God because of the way their neurons were misfiring. Now that's a plot twist no one saw coming. Let's bring in the big guns for a moment, the infamous God helmet once again. While Persinger's experiment has been criticized and debunked in parts, the sheer audacity of the idea still sends ripples through the field of neurotheology. Imagine putting on a helmet, flipping a switch, and having an instant spiritual experience. If that's not the stuff of dystopian sci-fi, I don't know what is. Even though subsequent studies by researchers like Granqvist failed to replicate Persinger's results, the God helmet experiment opened up the conversation about whether we can artificially stimulate the brain into a religious state. The whole thing comes down to how susceptible you are to suggestion, personality traits, and even how open you are to paranormal phenomena. Those who went into the experiment expecting a divine revelation tended to find one, whether or not the magnetic field was actually doing anything. Which begs the question, are you creating your own God every time you feel his presence, or are you just following a well-worn neural pathway of belief? But if you're still searching for a definitive answer about whether God lives in your neurons, well, you might want to take a page from Mario Beauregard's playbook. His research, particularly with Carmelite nuns, shows that spirituality isn't neatly contained in one part of the brain. It's spread out, involving several brain regions working in concert, including areas responsible for emotions, decision-making, and even self-reflection. Beauregard's studies conclude that there's no single God spot, no isolated corner of your gray matter where divine presence sits and waits to be found. Instead, spiritual experiences light up multiple parts of the brain, suggesting that they are as complex as your relationships with other humans. Just like love, friendship, or grief, your connection to the divine seems to be a full brain event, encompassing both logical and emotional centers. It's messy, it's widespread, and it's incredibly human, even if it all boils down to neurons firing in unison. So the next time you feel like you've touched something greater than yourself, know that it's not happening in one spot. It's everywhere in your mind, all at once. And just when you thought it couldn't get weirder, enter hippocampal atrophy. This little piece of research conducted by Duke University Medical Center suggests that intense religious experiences, especially those connected to life-changing events, might actually shrink parts of your brain. Yup, you heard that right. The hippocampus, crucial for memory and emotion, seems to atrophy in people who've had profound religious conversions, such as born-again Christians or Catholics. It's a wild thought, isn't it? That intense devotion, the kind that changes your life, might actually be altering your brain's structure. It's almost like the brain is making room for all the new beliefs, erasing the old wiring to accommodate the shift. Whether this is a positive adaptation or not, the science is still debating. But the very idea that religion can physically change the brain in such a concrete, measurable way adds another layer to the neurotheological debate. Your brain isn't just responding to spirituality, it's being molded by it. So where do psychedelics come back into play? Well, let's not forget that researchers have been using drugs like psilocybin to replicate religious experiences in lab conditions. You've got the usual suspects, magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, ushering willing subjects into states that closely mimic what others report during deep meditation or spiritual awakening. These substances trigger the brain's serotonin receptors, often leading to a loss of ego, an overwhelming sense of connection to the universe, and experiences that subjects describe as divine. Some neuroscientists argue that these chemicals simply open the floodgates of perception, allowing the brain to experience a fuller range of reality. Others claim they're just fooling the brain into believing in something that's not really there. But either way, the effect is profound, leading to new debates about whether spirituality is a state that can be induced, chemically, electrically, or just through sheer focus. Maybe the key to experiencing God is less about faith and more about finding the right switch to flip in your brain. As we wrap this up, let's get philosophical for a moment. If God, spirituality, and transcendence are all rooted in your brain's circuitry, does that make them any less real? Is your belief system diminished because it might just be a survival mechanism or the byproduct of some temporal lobe misfires? Or is it more beautiful, more profound, that your brain, with all its complex wiring, can tap into something so deeply mystical and unexplainable? Whether you see it as a divine gift or a quirk of evolution, one thing is certain: spirituality, in all its forms, is embedded in your humanity. You can't escape it, even if you wanted to. And perhaps, just maybe, that's the most spiritual thing of all. Thank you for sticking with me on this wild ride through the labyrinth of neurotheology. If your brain is still buzzing with questions, well, that's exactly what we want. So go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments. Is God in your neurons, or is there something more at play here? I can't wait to see where this conversation goes. And hey, if you enjoyed unraveling this cerebral mystery, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more brain-bending journeys. Until next time, my human friends, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep exploring the boundaries of your mind.